Non-stop. She doesn't stop. She goes.
So virtual though. I loved having to drive here. I never have to go anywhere anymore.
Joe, are we on? Hello and welcome to another special episode of Unchained Hope and Healing from Addictions. We're so excited that you're here with us. If you are new to our series, we are on a 10-day adventure, 10-day journey as we've been night after night listening to real people who came across very real problems and ultimately experienced real victory. And we want to know where you're viewing us from. Every night we've been getting people from all over the place, which is really cool. I know we had a person from Arizona the other night, and New England, and even all the way in Asia. So this is very exciting. We want to encourage you, if you're new to our series, or maybe if this is your second or third night and you have not yet registered, we want to encourage you right now, if you can, to text the word Unchained to the number which is 903 666 4541. 903-666-4541. And the reason why we're encouraging you to do that is because you are added to a text list, and it sends you a reminder, a notification of the nightly program, and it sends you a link that you could go straight to the stream. And also, you are included amongst lucky winners of a special gift, a book written by Richie Halverson entitled Darkness Shall Not Overcome. So we've been having winners every night, and you can possibly be the lucky winner. So please make sure that you register. Also, hit the like button if you're watching on Facebook, and click that share button. And maybe you want to tag one of your buddies, one of your friends that may be interested in some of this conversation. We're trying to, of course, share it with as many people as possible, and want to encourage you to do the same. Night after night, we've been listening to incredible stories, heart-gripping stories, amazing narratives of recovery, of rehabilitation. And we've noticed that addictions manifest themselves in many different ways. Sometimes we think that it's exclusively only dealing with substances. But what we've noticed as we've been going along in our series is that addictions comes around in many, many different ways. We have a special guest tonight, Elizabeth Fisher Good. And she is going to share with us how she experienced becoming unchained from secrets and shame. This is going to be kind of the backdrop of her story. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being with us. I know you're involved in a lot of things, which we're going to get into later. I know you're involved in a lot of organizations and a lot of ministries, but take us back to the early years, your upbringing, the context in which you kind of grew up in.
Right. Well, thanks for having me. Great to be here. I'm a mixed bag. I was raised, my dad's family, my dad's Puerto Rican, and so my maiden name is Melendez, came over from Puerto Rico to Chicago. But strangely enough, we weren't Catholic. My dad's father was a Baptist preacher.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? So I was raised in the Baptist church and grew up like in Awana and sword drills. So like just really all over all of that. But every summer, my mom's family is from Arkansas.
Wow.
And my mom's family is Holiness Pentecostal.
Wow. Wow, what a mix.
So you got the Bible sword drills over here, and then you got like flowing in the spirit over here. And so,
Wow.
full on healings and speaking in tongues and everything raised in that. So I had the two. And then by the time I was 11, my family started going to Willow Creek Community Church, which was the first mega church at the time with Bill Hybels.
Sure.
And switched over to that.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
So then,
got a lot of streams going on.
so you're multi-denominational, multi-ethnic. So you have quite a rich
O'Brien
background.
Melendez, yes.
Brian Melendez. So did you learn Spanish at all by any chance?
He wanted so much to be American. My dad and all of his sisters raised all of us cousins with English only.
English.
Horrible.
Well, it's not too late to learn. Spanish
know.
is an easy language to learn. So secrets and shame. Tell us a little bit about your first exposure to this expression, secrets and shame, and how did that, in one way or the other, kind of create a change for you? Tell us a little bit about the secrets and shame experience that you had.
Yeah. Well, I think it started, I was so in love with Jesus. I was one of those kids that was fortunate to have it be very real at a young age, like just in love with God, in love with Jesus. And when I was almost 7, my sister was accidentally killed. So she was 9 years older. My brother was
Wow.
11 years older. We had an accidental shooting in the home after coming home from Arkansas hunting all summer, putting guns away, an accident, and she was killed. And she was like my nurturer. And so I really believe I have a book called Groomed, and it speaks to my first secret was really grief because I was the youngest of probably 35 cousins. Like we were a
Wow,
really
it's a big
diverse,
family.
large family. And when she was killed, because it was a family member that the accident that accidentally killed her, everyone just went silent. And I was so young compared to, the oldest was 17, 18 years older than me. I have cousins. Everyone was lost in their own grief. We were such a close enmeshed family that I just didn't even know how to speak about it. And I think I felt forgotten.
Wow.
And so when I tried to tell somebody, at one point there was a wedding in the family, like a few weeks later, when one of the cousins got married, and my sister was supposed to stand up, and she wasn't there.
Mm.
And I was the flower girl. So I was just sort of in a corner crying. And one of my older cousins come by. They're like, "Why are you crying?" I'm like, "I miss Diana." They're like, "You didn't even know her."
Wow.
So somehow at that young age, it's like, all right, no one really wants to hear what I'm going through. Like, I'm just going to zip it. All these guys are older, more important. It's not about me. And then a few years later, going to Arkansas, which had become like my reprieve. Every summer was like chicks and puppies and
Right.
horses, and I got to name a new pony, and I mean, just amazing. But when I was probably close to 11, one of my favorite, not really an uncle, but a family friend, on the way to church, I was getting ready in the bathroom, and he had stopped over. Everyone sort of drove together, and he sort of came in the bathroom, and it's almost I liken it to a snake
Mm.
because he came in, and he was my favorite, had a nickname for me, everything, and he sort of put his arms around me. But then as he started, came behind me and just started molesting me.
Wow.
And I was brushing my hair, so you're just looking in the mirror and you're a child. I'm like 11. I'm going, this can't be happening. And then he just left.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, maybe that didn't happen. You're so as a child. And then we're leaving for church, and everyone's like, who's jumping in whose car? He's like, come on, you're coming with me. And before I know it, I'm in his car and all the way to church doing things. And I mean,
Really?
but staring at me while he's doing it, every stop, and I'm like, and just evil
While going to church.
on the way to church. And then we get there, and I stay in the car, and he jumps out, grabs his guitar, and heads to the front of the stage to lead worship.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so I think what's interesting about abuse, like I had already dealt with grief and I don't matter that much. No one really wants to know how I feel. But then when you have sexual abuse happen to you, it's one of the only offenses that you take on the perpetrator's shame. Like they should be full
Wow.
of shame,
Right.
but it's an instant transference that you hold the guilt and you hold the shame and you feel like, oh my gosh, is that somehow I did that? I created that. I allowed that. And I remember going in the bathroom and just crying. And I felt like this is unbelievable. All in my mind, never said a word. And then when I came out and went to sit in the pew, because all my family's like in the first couple of pews because we were really the leaders.
Right. You have to kind of play the part.
Yeah, so I go to sit down next to my other like favorite uncle, and as he goes to put his arm around me, I remember like lightning bolt. Like I never felt safe again.
Wow.
And I'm like, who knows what's going to happen next? And it just started a spiral of I never shared it. It took away more of my confidence, no self esteem. And then my parents ended up getting divorced. I put myself in situations where I just felt worthless.
So you were, ironically, you were a member of a very large family, but you felt very lonely
Very
because you
lonely,
didn't have
invisible,
the confidence of or the affirmation to even
or even the
speak
protection.
or the
Because
protection.
even when I decided, I said, I'm never going back to Arkansas. And no one asked me why. I had a billion cousins on the Arkansas side, I had a billion cousins on the Puerto Rican side. No one questioned it. I mean, many years later, over a decade later, my mom was like, when I said, did you ever wonder what, when I was finally starting to figure things out,
Right.
did you ever wonder why I didn't want to go back? She goes, well, I had a feeling.
Wow.
But that's the generational pattern of not speaking about this thing. So I think what really ties me to this concept of secrets being my chain is because I just kept acting perfect. I had such a private life with Jesus. I
Wow.
journaled as a little girl like
Wow.
crazy. And I just, I kept it inside. And then I felt so bad that the minute I hit high school, there was a party, someone gave me alcohol. I don't even remember. I blacked out. They said, oh, so and so had sex with you. I was raped at another. And it's like, well, I guess it doesn't matter. Prior to that, I still held it together. I was still the church girl. And I remember we were sitting in my kitchen one time, like right out of eighth grade going into high school. And it was all my friends from kindergarten. And everybody's like, oh, she's going to be the last one to have sex. She'll be married. She's such a church girl.
Right.
She'll be, use this protection, this
Right.
protection. And then just something happened. And once it happened publicly with me being a blackout, I got blackout drunk and used. and then I covered it, and somehow I just transitioned from church girl to bad girl,
Right.
and I just took that role on for
Interesting.
years of darkness, playing
Really.
that role,
So
privately
so
crying.
it seems like there was several episodes that was slowly opening the gates. We had this, of course, situation with the death of your sibling, the episode, of course, with your uncle, and then the situation at the party. So how did that spiral? How did that and how long did you sense that that impacted you? All of
Yeah.
those things.
Well, I would say I always said basically like from 14 to 20 was like my darkest. It's a
Wow.
miracle I made it out of 14 to 20.
Wow.
Hmm.
6 dark years.
Oh, tremendously dark. I mean, I had the low self-esteem leading into it, but then the drinking. That's why, like, when I launched one of the first anti-sex trafficking organizations here in Florida, um, the girls would come in and they would tell their stories, and they'd say how they'd been to rehab 23 times, and I'm like, your problem's not necessarily drugs. Your problem's shame.
Mm,
And no one had gotten to the root. You know, they had all been abused when they were little, and I found that with me covering that abuse and not feeling it, not acknowledging it, it took more and more to keep it covered. By the time I was in my early 20s, I belonged to Overeaters Anonymous.
really?
I was a 12-step program junkie. Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
it was just anything, but I wasn't actually healing because I hadn't spoken the truth.
So it seems like the foundation of the first step is conversations.
Speaking it out,
Being able to
telling
talk
someone.
about it without feeling judged or condemned. And because you didn't have that, it just kept, but you tried to medicate to a certain
Oh,
extent.
and like impression management. I mean, I had to keep nailing it and looking a certain way.
Wow.
And I really, I mean, I had two lives. I always say I didn't get reconciled back to who I was then until I was 34.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 53 now. The majority was unreconciled. Two parts. One so full of secrets and shame, and the other doing impression management all day long.
That's that's exhausting too, because you have to put
Exhausting.
a front. It's not really you. It's not genuine. It's not. Of course, you're doing that to protect yourself.
Oh, but exhausting.
So how did at a certain point I'm sure you came to a crossroad.
Well, it got better over the years, but
Right.
it wasn't gone.
Right.
I got better at medicating it.
But it wasn't completely dealt with.
Oh,
The
not
root of
even
the issue wasn't
slightly.
really dealt with. Speak on that a little bit.
I always say it's shades of gray. Like nobody sets out to, you don't just have an affair one day. You don't just have a porn addiction one day.
Right.
It's shades of gray along the way. So while
Gradually.
all this was going on, my house was full of porn. It was just a normal thing. And I used to remember reading it when I was younger. So like that secret part was growing. A
Mm,
lot of girls
mm.
don't speak to that, but everywhere I go, and if I speak openly like this, girls will come up after and like, I am addicted to porn. People think it's just boys. So I had all these secrets, all these dark places, but I didn't miss church. I mean, by the time I was in my early 30s, I was back again. I'm in leadership at church
That is so
with
interesting.
all of this unreconciled.
So you're essentially maintaining both
Oh, yeah,
worlds.
completely,
Wow. And then,
completely.
of course, you were a leader in the church. So
Hmm.
at what point did you address the issue? The root,
Well,
root, root. At what point were you able to actually able to talk about it, to speak, and who
I
was it?
had I had spoken about. I think probably in my 20s, I got to, really dealing with the grief from my sister. I think I mentioned the sexual abuse and talked about that, but I didn't. Then when you speak about that, there's all these layers in between that I was still hiding.
Right.
And I think it was interesting. I think God just got me because He's like, "Oh, girl, I have plans for you. We've got to knock this off."
Wow.
Satan is having. I always say, like, I feel like the minute we're born, if Satan can't get us in the womb, that is his ultimate desire. Like he hates the fact that we can give life, and he would
Right.
love to sever that.
Right.
But the minute we come out, I always say, like, it's like you got a baby and you got purpose, and God is like depositing this purpose and destiny into a child. And the minute you're born, the battle begins.
Wow.
And my battle was just intense, like intense, intense, intense. And so, really, when I was 34 years old, I was pregnant with my third. So I'm married, I'm in leadership, I'm looking good. My dad's like, oh, every time I come to your house, it's like a circus in your backyard, like the next best birthday party. Everything was impression
Yeah.
management. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
looked
Yeah.
really good, but
Wow.
I was still so full of pain. Didn't really even know it because I'd lived it for so long. But I mean, my journaling was always desperate. Like, Jesus, I know that there's more. And I couldn't figure it out. And so I oddly had what most people don't have. I had a crazy intervention by God.
Mm,
I
mm.
had grown up with my different denominations and different wounds along the way from different ones. And my girlfriend, when I was pregnant with my third, I had placenta previa,
Wow.
which is I was going to have to go on bed rest. So I had two toddlers, and I was going to have to go on bed rest. And I'm like, I can't can't do this. I'm the one that keeps everything going.
Of
Like,
course.
you take me out, we're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I had a girlfriend, oddly enough, she was not a real strong believer. She was, Catholic, and she had had an encounter with a healing. And a priest had actually had the gift of healing and met
Mm.
with her when she had cancer. So she said to me, I can't believe I didn't tell you this priest is coming to my house. Do you want to come? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have placenta previa. I'm coming. But don't tell him. I want him to guess like he did with you.
Right.
Because even though I'd grown up in the gifts and all of that, I hadn't healed at all.
Wow.
Like I might have talked about, I was this, I could report on things. But reporting and healing are
Mhm.
two different things.
Right.
Sometimes we're very good staying disassociated and speaking to what happened to me, but you're not free yet.
Right. Right.
And so I go running to meet with this priest. I mean, I have no clue what I'm running to. And he goes, oh, who am I praying with first? There's a whole house of people. I'm like, me. And we sit, and he starts praying over me. And he has two prayer partners, and he goes, what are you here for? And I said, oh, just healthy pregnancy. That's all. Totally lying, just lying to a
Because
priest.
you wanted to give the impression that you had things under control.
I'm great. And he's
Yeah.
like, you're here for a healing mass, and I'm like, yeah. And so he goes, well, and he starts praying. He goes, I can't get past. He goes, there's something blocking our prayer.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, and I'm thinking, well, because he stinks, I mean, this guy,
That's on you. That's not on me.
Catholic gift of healing. Okay.
Wow.
And then he goes
Wow.
on, and then finally he can't get anywhere, and he goes, I feel like it's more of a sin. And I said, I had an abortion when I was 17. I said, could that be it? And he goes, well, have you ever confessed it? I go, confess? I'm not Catholic. And he goes, oh, you Protestants. He said, okay. He said, James, 3:16 or 5:16. He goes, the prayer of a righteous man,
Oh,
confess
goodness,
your
yeah.
sins one to another. Prayer of a righteous man has authority to heal. I mean, I could be a priest. It could not be a priest, but confess. And I said, okay. He said, well, do you want to get rid of it as far as the east is from the west? I'm like, absolutely. He goes, all right, let's pray. And he starts praying in tongues and anointing me in oil. And I'm like, where am I? And he goes, okay. He goes, you're forgiven. But now the Lord would have you do penance. And I'm like, penance again? I'm not Catholic. And he goes, Protestant, do you think you might need some healing about that one you've been keeping for 17 years? And I'm like, yeah. So he said, Jesus would have you go serve at a pro-life center. And I'm like, what? And I'm just like, okay, I'm going to have a come to Jesus moment. I'll do it. I'll say yes, and I will take the next steps, and I'll do whatever. And then from that point, this man literally read my mail.
Wow.
All the areas that I had kept hidden. He goes, well, I think the Lord would like to see what other open doors you have.
Wow.
And honestly, he hit, he's telling me that there's pornography. I'm like, oh my gosh. I have my girlfriends sitting next to me that are perfect, also North Shore wives.
You felt exposed.
Oh my gosh.
You felt embarrassed.
And
Like,
he's
oh my goodness.
sharing all my, and he's like, this, that. Probably, he said, you have an open door to the occult. I'm like, what? But I had grown up, my crazy family. You would go to church and then stop on your way home and buy your horoscope. And it was like, both, either or, and,
Right.
and all these, and so each one he prayed, and are you ready to close that door? Are you ready to close that door? Confess it. You're ready to be, just so biblical.
Wow.
But he went through a number of them. Psychology as idolatry. I had my master's in clinical psych, and I was like, oh, I've done this, but I'm healed. All
Yeah,
head,
yeah,
head,
yeah,
head.
yeah.
And so he gets all the way done, and he said, you know what? Now the Lord's telling me I could pray for your baby. I'm like, oh, I forgot about the baby. There was thing after
You're
thing
dealing with
of,
all these other things. Wow.
oh. And he said, the Lord's telling me there's something going on with your placenta. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm so sorry. And he
Wow.
goes, well, he said, what he's telling me is that you've received all this emotional and spiritual healing. Do you believe that you could be physically healed? And I said, I know I could be physically healed. I've seen it my whole life, when I was a child. And he said, let's pray. So he starts praying, and I'm smelling like incense burning. I'm like, what is going on?
Wow.
And he goes, you've received a complete healing. He said, don't resume regular activity. Do you see a doctor?
Right.
And I'm like, okay. He said, but the Lord wants to give you one more gift. And I'm like, what is going on? I said, Dina, I'm smelling incense. And she goes, no, I smelled that during my healing. He goes, you've been given the gift of the, manifestation of the burning of your iniquities, and you're smelling in the spirit. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, this is for a girl that learned how to numb her entire life. The Lord had to strike me with lightning
Right.
to get me.
So this is definitely foreign territory for you.
Oh my goodness.
You feel a little bit out of place, but at the same time, you know that you're addressing things
Oh, it was
that
beautifully
you
humbling.
needed to address and you've needed it to address.
Perfectly humbling.
So this happens, and then at what point do you find yourself in a position where you know that the chains have fallen off? Of course, we're all in a process, of course.
Oh,
You
right.
haven't arrived per
Oh,
se.
no.
But
No.
at what point did you sense, wow, like this is I
Yeah.
see it, I sense it.
Well, you know what? He ended our time together. He said, "The Lord has one more gift for you. He wants to give you the gift of tears." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "You've gotten so hardened. He
Wow,
wants to restore in you a heart of flesh."
because you were building this kind of
I had such a
callus.
wall around me. And so when he prayed that time, it was as if something melted and I was restored back to who I was as a little girl.
Wow,
So for me, it was almost suddenly. And I say again and again, like, Lord, why did I get that gift? Who gets that
that's
gift?
amazing.
Yeah,
So your innocence was restored.
I, right. And I went through the steps of penance, you know,
Right, right.
I sat and grieved. If you don't grieve, unresolved grief, trauma's still there.
Sure.
You can't fake that. And I think we're a culture that short circuits all of this. So,
So, Elizabeth, there's so many different directions we can go, but in the couple minutes we have left, for your story, if there's somebody watching that
mhm,
is finding themselves in the same situation that you were in,
yeah,
where there's trauma,
yeah,
there's hidden addictions,
yep.
but there's a pressure to look a certain way, to look the part, whether it's church, whether it's just family. What message would you give to that individual viewing that is like, oh my goodness, Elizabeth is went through exactly what I'm currently going through right
Yeah.
now? What message in 30, 45 seconds, what message can you convey to that individual that's kind of struggling and trying to figure out?
I would say if you have somebody in your life that you know you can speak to, go for it. It's going to be the scariest thing in the world, but the power of saying it out loud, the
Wow.
power of speaking it changes everything. And if you don't know, I would have them email. I mean, you could email me, e@freewithe.com. They could email me directly and I'll connect them
Say
to
that one more
safe
time. The
places.
email again?
So
E
E like Elizabeth at free, free with
with E
dot com.
dot com. So there.
If they don't know who to talk to, I will guide them and give them a place.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So, if you're viewing this and if you're kind of in a similar situation that Elizabeth was, where you don't know who to go to, you may even be surrounded by a bunch of family and people and
Hmm.
coworkers and colleagues, or maybe even part of a church that
Right.
has brothers and sisters, but you still don't feel confidence. Elizabeth here is available to speak with you. And of
Yeah.
course, she has experience, not just intellectually, but
No.
experientially about how to recover. Now, there's a lot more to cover. Elizabeth's story this is a slither of her story. Elizabeth, don't go anywhere. We're going to cover more, talk more a little bit about the current ministry that you're involved with in our Q&A session. But and we also don't want you to go anywhere either, because right now we're going to listen to a powerful message by Pastor Richie Halverson. And after that message, then we'll hear more from Elizabeth. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome to Unchained, Hope and Healing from Addiction. The only way I was able to break through the chain that held me back was when I finally was willing to admit, you know what, I don't have all the answers. What I was doing wasn't working. And so I had to start listening to other people who knew things that I didn't know. You know, I knew how to get high, but I didn't know how to get clean. I had to take the cotton out of my ears and I had to put it in my mouth. I remember I had someone at a meeting who told me very quickly early on, I was talking a lot because I had read a lot and I thought I knew a lot. And one of these old timers, is what we called them, told me, Richie, shut up, take the cotton out of your ears and stick it in your mouth. You see, I had to be willing to learn something new from someone else. I had to stop acting like I was charged. I needed someone bigger, better, smarter, stronger than me to be in charge. In the book of Mark 5:22, we have an interesting story of someone who was used to being in charge. Jairus was one of the synagogue presidents, it says. He was used to being the leader. He was used to doing all the talking. But if you want to live an unchained life, you have to be willing to let someone else be in charge. You've got to be willing to listen to someone else sometime. In Mark 5:23, Jairus comes up to Jesus. He says, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come, lay hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So check this out. Jairus is telling Jesus how to heal his daughter. But Jairus doesn't know how to heal people. Jairus doesn't know how to perform miracles. Just like I didn't know how to stay clean, Jairus doesn't know what he's talking about. So in Mark 5:22, when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. So he's kneeling. He seems to be kind of praying. He's open to the eye of giving up control. But the very next verse, he starts ordering Jesus around. Have you ever used prayer to try to order God around? Have you ever tried to tell someone else what they need to be doing in their life? In recovery, we say, don't give advice. You know, advice kills. We only share experience, strength, and hope. People don't need advice. They need to hear that you got through something, and they need to hear hope of how they can get through something. We got to be willing to listen to someone else. What does Jairus know about healing? What do you know about living unchained? Before Jesus can give Jairus what he's asking for, Jairus has to let go of the control and give it over to God. Now compare Jairus' request to this centurion who also is asking Jesus to heal someone. Luke 7:7 and 8. It says, I did not presume to come to you, but say the word, Jesus, and let my servant be healed. For I too am a man set under authority with soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and they go, and to another, come, and they come, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. The centurion was a good leader because, you see, he knew how to be led. Before you can ever lead, you got to first learn how to be led. In spite of Jairus, Jesus still goes with him. Man, I am so glad, in spite of some of the dumb things that I've said, I've had good friends who've still been willing to go with me. In spite of our problems, our big egos, in spite of the incessant fighting and debating, Jesus still goes. Instead of telling Jairus, Jesus is going to show Jairus. Some of us, we only learn by being shown. We can't take someone's word for it. We've got to experience the pain for ourselves. Mark 5:25, there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. So here we have another character come into the scene. On the way to Jairus' house, something is getting in the way of Jairus' plan. Man, we hate it when things get in the way of our plans, don't we? But sometimes interruptions are interventions. Sometimes the thing that we think is getting in the way is actually the best possible thing that could happen for us. Man, I can see Jairus pushing Jesus with one hand, come on, Jesus, I got to get you going where I'm going, and he's batting people away with the other hand. Jesus is in a hurry, and it seems like Jesus is taking his time. I wonder, has God ever seemed to take his time in your life? Maybe he's trying to teach you something. Maybe he's trying to show you something. And so this woman in Mark 5:28, she says, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. The Greek word for healed means rescued. You see, God wants to rescue you from what's killing you. God wants to rescue you from whatever is draining you. In Mark 5:26, this woman had suffered much under many physicians. She had spent all she had and was no better. Rather, she grew worse. So think about it. She had tried all kinds of things. I know for me, man, I had tried all kinds of things to quit using opioids. I tried a lot of things to quit all kinds of addictions and to live an unchained life. This woman has tried all kinds of things, but instead of it getting better, it's only growing worse. She had plenty of people's opinions. She had plenty of treatment options. Her purse was full of prescriptions, but she's still bleeding. She's still not enjoying life. Think of all the stuff this woman had to push through to get to Jesus. Man, she had to push through the people telling her it was all in her head. She had to push through all the people who said, you know what, once an addict, always an addict. She had to push through all the critics and the naysayers and the haters. She had to push past the internal voice that says, you're always going to be this way. You're a mess up. You will never live an unchained life. She had to push past the toxic voices in her life. If I can just reach out and touch him, I'll be healed. If I can just tap into something stronger than me. And so she comes up behind him in the crowd. She touches his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Check it out. Jesus was able to stop the bleeding no one else could stop. Jesus could fix a problem no one else could fix. You see, we cannot fix our own problem because we are a part of the problem. If we want to live an unchained life, we've got to tap into something stronger than we are. I can't, he can. I think I'll let him. And Jesus realized at once that the healing power had gone out of him. And so he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my robe?" And the disciples are like, "Well, what? I mean, Jesus, you see this crowd crushing you, and you ask who touched me?" But check this out. Jesus knows the difference between someone putting their hands on him to push him or a need that pulls him. And this is why I believe when something pulled at him, instead of pushing him, it changed his direction. You see, that's what separated the woman from Jairus. You see, the woman's need pulled Jesus. Jairus was trying to push Jesus. In John 10:18, Jesus says, "Look, no one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again." You see, friends, it wasn't the push that put Jesus on the cross. It was his love for us that pulled him there. Stop letting people and problems push you around. Stop letting addiction push you around. Stop letting other people decide what is best for your life. Stop chaining yourself to that toxic relationship. Stop letting them push you and let God pull you into your purpose. Man, in the massive crowd, Jesus can discern one touch. God can feel your loneliness in a crowded room. He can see your brokenness in a broken world. He knows what's draining us, and if we would just reach out and touch him, he'll stop the bleeding. And so Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Meanwhile, I imagine Jairus just kind of looking at his watch. "What are you doing, Jesus? Man, I've got something to do. I'm important." This woman had a bleeding problem, which meant, according to that custom, that Jewish custom, she would have been ceremonially unclean. She was unclean. She shouldn't touch Jesus. No doubt, Jairus, being a president of the synagogue, "Hey, you don't have time to mess with that unclean person. I'm important." The woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and she fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Check it out. It says the whole truth. Remember, Jairus is in a hurry. The Greek word for whole truth means everything. She tells Jesus everything, every detail. She's been sick for 12 years. She tells the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. She tells Jesus every detail. Jairus is tapping his foot, but you see, Jesus will not be pushed around. And while this woman is testifying, Jairus' daughter is dying. "I don't have time for this," he probably thought. But you know what? I've discovered in life, it's not all about me. It's not all about what I want. At the core of addiction is selfishness. It's not all about you. It's not all about me. You know, sometimes we act like we're the only people with problems. Sometimes we act like we're the only ones that need help. You know, my sponsor once told me in recovery, he said, "Richie, I know it may look like the sun rises and sets over your head, but you are not the center of the universe." You see, Jesus is going to deal with Jairus' problem, but he's going to deal with this woman's problem along the way. Jesus is on his way to deal with your problem, but one of the ways he's going to deal with your problem is by dealing with someone else's problem along the way, because your greatest problem is not what you think it is. Your greatest problem, my greatest problem, it's me. And nothing gets me out of me quicker than helping someone else. And we're going to talk about this more in session 9. But to God, no one is more important than anyone else. I don't care the person living up under the bridge or the person in the house with a 5-car garage. No one's more important than anyone else. No one's problems is more important than anyone else. The nameless, unclean Gentile woman is just as important to Jesus as the famous Jewish male leader. You know, too often, like Jairus, we want to tell God what he's going to do, how he's going to do it, and when he's going to do it. But that doesn't work. That's a part of the problem. We're trying to be God instead of letting God be God. Before Jesus can heal his daughter, Jesus has to heal Jairus. Mark 5:35, as he said this, some people arrived from the synagogue, the president's house. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? And so that small glimmer of hope leaves Jairus' eyes. In that moment, he realizes just how small he really is. And that, my friends, is when Jesus can really help him. Sometimes we've got to get knocked off our high horse. Sometimes, we've got to just hit that bottom. Sometimes we've got to fall down for God to finally be able to get through to us. Mark 5:36. But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. Interestingly, the Greek word for overhearing means refused to listen or ignore. Check that out. Jesus ignores what the people say. He looks right into Jairus' hopeless eyes and he says, do not fear, only believe. I don't care what anybody else thinks. God is ignoring the skeptics. He's ignoring the critics, and he's looking at you. Do not fear, only believe. They're not in charge. I am. So the moment we stop limiting God by what we can do, we can start seeing what God can do. 1 Corinthians 2:9 says, no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. Ephesians 3:20 says, God is capable of doing far, far more than we could ever ask or imagine. You see, Jairus came to Jesus for healing, but Jesus was planning something better. Jesus wasn't just planning on a healing. Jesus was planning a resurrection. Man, God's plans for us are always bigger than our plans for us. God's idea for an unchained life, living freely and abundantly, is always bigger. When my first year clean, my sponsor told me to write down all the things I wanted to see, all my plans and goals for living my first year clean. He says, Richie, write down everything that you want to see happen, and I promise you, God's going to blow your expectations to smithereens. Because to be honest, I just wanted to hold a job. I just wanted to get a job. I just didn't want to go away to prison. I started making that list. In a year, when I hit that year mark, man, not only did I have a job, I had my family back. I had my relationships were started flourishing again. I started serving in my community. I got so many more things. God's plans for you are always bigger than your plans for you. Mark 5:38, they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child's not dead, but sleeping. And check it out, they laughed at him. Has anyone ever laughed at you? When the scoffers come between Jesus and his miracle, it says that he kicked them out. Whatever is coming between you and your miracle, let God kick it out. Verse 40 says, he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. In ancient Israel, they actually hired mourners, which means many of these people mourning weren't really upset. They were paid to be upset. And that's why they go from crying one moment to laughing the next. You know, there are people in your life who will go from patting you on the back one moment to stabbing you in the back the next moment. And look, I believe in being kind to everyone, but my inner circle is saved for those who want to see God do a miracle. My inner circle, the people that I'm going to spend the most time with, are going to be the people that want to see me succeed, that believe in me. It's time to kick all the fake, pretentious people out of your life because they are coming between you and your miracle. Jairus and his wife are totally overwhelmed by grief. They still can't believe that their little girl is gone. But then she encounters Christ and they find out that death is nothing more than a sleep when it comes to God. Mark 10:27 says, all things are possible with God. Where there is Jesus, there is always a way. Don't ask for a little help. You need more than a little help. All of us do. We don't need help. We need the hand of God to change us, to free us. Mark 5:41, taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha kum, which means, little girl, get up. Man, Jesus is saying the same thing to everyone who's watching right now. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to get up. Both the bleeding woman and the girl were ceremonially unclean. One was dead, one had a disease. Touch was forbidden, but Jesus reaches out and touches them both. Because you see, until you have an encounter with something stronger than you, then you'll never have that fuller, freer life. The girl lived for 12 years. Think about that. The woman suffered for 12 years. So the beginning of suffering and the beginning of life happened at the same time. When the woman's suffering started, it was the beginning of life for the girl. You see, friends, Christ's suffering was the beginning of our new life. Because he went into the tomb, you and I can come out of the tomb. In order to stop our bleeding, God was willing to come in the flesh and bleed. You want to know what a real leader looks like? You want to know someone you can really trust with your life? Luke 9:51 says, when the days drew near for him to be taken, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. The same hand that healed the woman, the same hand that raised the girl, can touch your life right now, today. Jairus thought he needed Jesus just for his daughter. Maybe you're watching this because you think this is for someone else. We always tend to think in that way, well, I don't struggle with addiction. No. Just as Jairus thought he needed Jesus for his daughter, Jesus had to show Jairus that he needed Jesus just as much. Man, people struggling with addiction aren't the only ones who need to practice these principles. All of us do. You see, Jairus' daughter was not the only one who came back to life that day. So did Jairus. Let God lead your life. Let God be in charge. Stop acting like you know everything. Let someone who knows what they're doing help you, guide you. Stop shortchanging living an unchained life. Allow that chain of ego and pride and self-obsession and control get broken by the breakthrough of humility today. I don't have to control everything. I don't have to have all the answers anymore. The day I started listening and learning is the day I started living an unchained life. God wants the same thing for you right now.
Thank you so much, Richie, for that powerful message. We're going to continue with Elizabeth. If you're just joining us, you missed a lot. So we're going to get into our Q&A, but before we get into our Q&A, I think it's very important, Elizabeth, for you to speak a little bit about the organization that you are involved with, the Foundation United, Global Solutions to Eradicate Sexual Exploitation. Can you speak a little bit about that, just so that people are aware of?
Definitely.
Yeah.
After being in this space for decades, in a sense, we realize that if we don't get to the heart and the root of everything systemically, we're not going to get anywhere. It's not about opening one more safe house or training one more cop. It's about changing systems. And so what we do at the Foundation United is we bring together the best of the best, some of the best leaders, the best organizations around the country, even around the world, that understand that we have to work together collaboratively and get to the root and change systems. Wow. So we have an arm that's just about training ER docs, one that's just about training law enforcement, because both, it's 87% will see a survivor and a doc will stitch her up in the ER and give right back to her trafficker and not know what he's looking at. And then we have it for the schools, teaching children to speak up, teaching teachers to know how to understand what's happening if a child looks different one day than they did before the weekend. Wow. We have a program for churches, a tool called Real Talk that opens up conversations in the church, like the one we're having today, and helps the church from kindergarten all the way through leadership. Beautiful, beautiful.
So if somebody wanted to kind of get more information, is there a website? Where would they go?
Yes, absolutely. Go to the Foundation United, so thefoundationunited.org.
Thefoundationunited.org. And then you mentioned you made reference to a book that you wrote.
Yeah.
Speak on that briefly,
Yes.
and where can our viewers
Yes,
find that
the
book?
book is available everywhere, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, but it's called Groomed. It has all my names, Groomed by Elizabeth Melendez Fisher Good. And Groomed, it speaks to the heart of the places that we've come into agreement with lies.
Right.
We were groomed and we come into a role. So it just helps you unpack that grooming. It gives you the tools about what we talked about today to do that journey for yourself. And we have it rolled out full scale for churches.
Amazing.
So Groomed,
Amazing. Barnes and Noble,
anywhere, Amazon,
anywhere you could get.
Amazon.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, let's jump into some of these questions. Question number 1 says, "You seem to be passionate about secrets. Can you help us understand a little bit more?" Obviously, secrets is it's very. I mean, this is gonna sound a little bit redundant, but secrets are very secretive.
They are.
So how do we understand like the nature of secrets, and why are you so passionate about this? Obviously, you
Right.
shared a little bit about how
Well,
it
I
affected
just
you.
think that it's a slippery slope, right? It's shades of gray, and one builds upon another. Like I shared earlier about having an abortion and coming out of abuse and coming out of rape and coming out of loss and grief and unexpressed tragedies in my life that I didn't deal with. And it built up thing upon thing, layer upon layer, that turned me into someone I wasn't even close to ever thinking I would ever be.
Mm.
And so our secrets are just a pathway to a place we never wanted to go,
Wow.
and releasing them, speaking them out, the power of the spoken word and another person actually hearing you. Because in our mind, we think it's the worst thing in the world. Every single person, every time I speak, there's always someone that comes up and they say, I've never told anybody this. And they tell me what they think is going to be like tragic, never heard it before. I'm like, that's almost textbook.
Mm.
But the lies in our head that we think we're the only ones, and the shame, the
Wow.
enemy comes to town to steal your purpose, steal your identity, and he gets it by thinking you're not good enough.
Wow.
And I think the power of speaking it out changes everything.
So our shame and our secrets make us feel like we're the only ones.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever done what I've done.
And it limits us. It could keep us from, like, you were created for an exact purpose and destiny.
Wow.
And the enemy's working overtime to make you feel you can't get there.
Wow.
If there's enough shame, or if you have this secret still, it's going to rob you from
Wow.
your full
I love
calling.
that. I love that. And we all have them. We all have it.
We
That's
all
the
have
main
'em.
thing.
Yep.
So our next question says, "I've heard you speak before in your story about the importance of starting at the root. What does that mean in regards to secrets and shame? Do secrets and shame have a root? What is it?"
There's always a root. I mean, for 1 out of 3 women in America, for 1 out of 5 men, the root is sexual abuse.
Mm.
That's not always everybody's root, but some people's root is verbal abuse, physical abuse, witnessing something that they can't unsee, holding another person's secret.
Sure.
Some people grow up keeping a secret about one of their parents.
Wow.
Or, I've heard so many stories, but the getting to the root, like I said before, a woman said she was taken to rehab 23 times. She didn't have a problem with addiction. She had a problem with shame.
Right.
And once she really got the deep healing down here of all the things that had been done to her, then this falls off. Like with me, it was instant. My addiction fell off. I never had a desire to open this again, do this again. Like, it went away when this stuff is really all the way. So I always
Right.
say it's not about, I am a therapist, right? But it's not about, come sit on my couch every week and give me $160 every week, and we're going to talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. I'm just going to keep taking your money. The Holy Spirit gets in there.
Right.
The church starts becoming the place that this is practiced. I start telling you what's going on. There is power in speaking it out, the person praying, and it changes everything. Like, we know now neural pathways can change, and it's not the old pathways that we thought.
I love that because it's in harmony with what we're trying to share, which is hope and healing. It's possible. And,
Easier.
And yeah, it's so interesting that when you're sharing about shame and these types of things, that it could last for years and years and years. There's no expiration date on these things.
And it'll manifest differently. Like, I knew a person that, they were an alcoholic, right? So they joined Alcoholics Anonymous. They never dealt with the healing, but they got some patterns to stop this. Then they became a gambler. Then they became a I
Oh,
mean, the
wow.
addiction just rotated.
Because the root wasn't.
The root wasn't healed. And you still had an addictive personality. You're only doing any of this. the shopping, the eating.
Interesting.
I used to buy a new outfit on the way to work on Michigan Avenue and change my entire clothes because I felt so invisible.
Wow.
It was just lies in your head that you just don't feel worthy.
Sure.
We do all this so we don't feel what hasn't been healed.
I love it. And then a lot of times we spend too much time dealing on the symptoms
All day long,
and
symptom
not
management.
dealing with the actual
Yes.
root. I love that. Wow. That's I have to think that's a loaded conversation. So, you mentioned the church. We talked a little bit about that in your narrative. What can the church do to help those struggling with living in bondage to secrets and shame? It's a complicated situation, but how does the
Right.
church is it possible for the church to be unchained from this unfortunate cyclical behavior?
Jay, there's nothing I'm more passionate about
Mm,
because if the church does not get there, we do not have a chance.
that's right.
You always hear organized crime, they are the most successful business
Wow.
because they're all working together. They
Interesting.
are all moving towards in their crime world where the church, first of all, we have 42,000 denominations outside of
Sure.
Catholicism, right?
Sure.
And we are all broken and we're not like leading the narrative with these serious problems. The fact that 1 out of 9 children today are being groomed right in their own bedrooms, 1 out of 9 children on their social media, whatever device they have, the stats we grew up with, stranger danger, right?
Right.
And now it's social media, 1 out of 9 are being trolled. When I started in this movement 12 years ago, the average age a little girl posted a naked selfie was 12.
Wow.
Now, the average age, 7.
Wow.
7. And so the church, all of these girls that I dealt with over the years through sex trafficking, through abuse, many of them were abused in church. Many of them never told anybody. They went to church every week. You're going to interview another woman later in the week
That's
that
right.
went to church week after week. Nobody knew the secrets in her family. Half of her family was pastors. The church has to become the place of truth. We've crossed over the hypocrisy. And what
Mercy.
we have now in the Foundation United is it's a tool. I don't even call it a program. It's not a curriculum. You don't buy it and check
Right.
the box.
Right.
It's introducing a language
I love it.
that changes everything. It unlocks conversations like this and it normalizes it. And it starts in kindergarten, and we have tracks all the way up through leadership so that the next generation is being groomed for transparency, groomed to speak freely. And then we're teaching this one how to heal
This is amazing.
so that they could talk to this one. My
This-
mom didn't speak to me because she wasn't healed.
I mean, this should have been developed 50 years ago. Actually, longer before that. And now as a father, I have children, which kind of segues into
Yeah.
our next question is, and you actually alluded to this whole idea of being groomed in their own bedroom. I want you to talk a little bit about, or help us understand the landscape for kids today. Obviously, we know that children are exposed easier and in higher dosages to things that maybe in the past it was harder to have access to. So for the parents that, like myself and those that are viewing, what tips can you share for parents that are trying to protect their children, but of course they want to be balanced?
Right.
What are some
Right.
helpful tips? that
Well,
you can
not to
share?
live in fear, right? But to be able to speak openly and honestly. At the foundationunited.org, we do have a resource page for parents. Downloadable books you could read, stories you could talk to your kids about. But also, if you're part of a school, trying to get our Speak Up program in there. If you're part of a church, getting Real Talk in there. Because what's happening is if there's this level of abuse, which we've touched on, right? So abuse is over here. You got one lane going over here. So
Right.
kids are being abused. But over here, what we've learned from research is that pornography,
Mm.
that also used to start with addiction at 12. Now we're looking at boys and addictions beginning at 8 to
Wow.
pornography. And we are seeing that it is rewiring their neural pathways. It is changing how they are being groomed for intimacy. So we're looking at
Mm.
these horrific stats of marriage, same in the church as out of the church.
Right.
The church is not leading these conversations. We need to be talking about this stuff because what's happening on social media and what's happening on the internet. I grew up, I'm 53. We had nice airbrushed Playboy. My porn was pretty okay because now they say it's equal to Cosmo. Almost, right?
Right.
Where what our children are being groomed on, a child at 8, 9, 10, they can Google anything and the images are so defiling and horrific. There's a little girl, and I feel like this will cover it exactly for parents and why the church has to take the position here.
Of course.
Because a little girl, she wrote a story, and it was called Sweet 16 and Never Been Kissed.
Mm.
And so she said, since I was 9 or 10 years old, Boys have been showing me images on their phones. Will you do this to me? Can I do that to you? Can we do this together? She goes, I have been used for sex more ways than I can count, but I'm sweet 16 and I'm still waiting for my first kiss.
Wow.
And so,
Amazing. So parents are involved in this narrative. The church is involved.
we have to
It
be
takes a
leading the
village.
conversation. We have to talk about these conversations. We have to help little girls know that's not love. Performing an act that someone shows you on their phone
Right.
is not how you form intimacy.
Right.
And boys aren't being taught how to love.
How to be
Because if
gen-
no
yeah,
one's talking about it, they're learning it, unfortunately, on a
exactly.
device.
So it begins in the home more so
Families.
than in school. And a lot of times I think we defer a lot of what we need to do
Oh,
as mom and dad,
yeah.
and we defer it to the school teacher. And the school teacher, of course, has a part in it, but we have to be very careful that we don't just kind of wash our hands and
Right.
just
Well,
defer
especially
it.
with all the stuff coming out of public schools today.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
we have to lead it. And if the church can take the lead here, this is what God would have us do.
Exactly.
These and the way that it's rolled into real talk, it makes it so easy.
Love it.
So easy.
So our last question is: I've heard you say, somebody mentioned, and you did mention this expression in your story, shades of gray. No one sets out to be in hiding or living in bondage. Can you speak to that more? That's what the
Yeah.
question says. Shades of gray. Break that down.
Shades of gray. So you have a little boy, right? So by 12 years old, he has this porn addiction. We were at a Catholic high school, and we had maybe 89 juniors and seniors, and it was a bunch of boys. And we were talking about what addiction is and what does porn look like. And they're like, well, how do you know if you're addicted? And it's like, well, you wake up in the morning, you're like, I'm not going to look at it today. And then by 10 o'clock, you're like, oh, and they're like, oh, and they're like, okay, so you guys want to just raise your hand if you think that's you? Almost the entire student body raised their hand.
Wow.
Like it is so normalized. So that kid who is learning that all of his sexual relations are happening into a device
Mm.
as he gets older and he gets married. And the wife is now, what I do see all the time in church as I lead these groups is the wives will share, to be honest and intimate, that they're not having sex,
Right.
that they haven't had it in I don't know how long.
Mm.
Then where is your husband having it? What's that?
Right.
And we're leading the church, and these are a lot of our marriages. And I think that the shades of gray, like when you see a pastor, I can tell you after running sex trafficking organizations for almost over 12 years now, the pastors that are in the sex trafficking rings. My daughter went with a youth group to Disney World. One of the youth group leaders was arrested in a sting the week after. The leaders that call me and say, how do we deal with this? In the temples, in the church, I'm getting calls all over.
Wow.
And 11-year-olds being molested by a pastor. It's we're getting so desensitized. And what these guys will always say is, I don't know how this happened. I never set out to have sex with a child.
Mm.
It was porn, and then it wasn't cutting it and it wasn't doing it. Satan is grooming all of us.
Gradually
Shades
leading to
of
more
gray.
complicated.
Yeah, you need more.
Elizabeth, there's a gazillion other questions that even in my brain, and obviously our viewers, one more time, if somebody would like to get in contact with you, if they have questions,
Yes.
what email would our viewers be able to
You know what? I
access?
will keep them on the foundationunited.org, but you could reach me at thefoundationunited.org. Whether you need a private pathway on how to heal, you don't know who to talk to, I have resources around the country. It doesn't matter where you live. With Zoom today, I could help you set up something to take that next step. There are next steps for all of us.
Wow.
And if we don't step into it, we're going to be halted from what the Lord wants us to be.
Hallelujah.
And I want to give everyone the power to know, yes, you can take that next step. I will help you find your perfect next step. I promise
I
you.
love it. Elizabeth, I cannot thank you enough for being here. This has been an educational, inspiring experience. You've taken us on a journey. Before we finish our show tonight, we want to announce the lucky winner of our book, well, Richie's book, Richie Halverson's book, Darkness Shall Not Overcome. And the lucky winner is, drum roll, Nancy Allen. Nancy Allen, you are the lucky winner. We're going to make sure that you get this book into your hands, and we pray that it's a blessing to you. Once again, Elizabeth, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for viewing. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow night for another story of Unchained. God bless.
Thank you.